We often get asked the question, how can cities combine financing under the investment plan for Europe with financing that they receive under the structural funds, the European structural and investment funds? Now, this, for example, could be in the context of an urban development fund that they're trying to set up, where they might be wanting to use EU funds on a grant basis, but also find a way to use the guaranteed loans from EIB as a way of leveraging private sector investment. And I have to say, this is actually quite challenging, but we have done it. So it is possible, and we know the way to do it. And in fact, if cities are interested in finding out more, they can contact the EIB through the European Investment Advisory Hub. Now, some of the things that have to be borne in mind when trying to combine these two financing approaches, one of them is to meet the various criteria that apply to each. So the criteria for the use of the structural and investment funds have to be fully satisfied, and the criteria for the investment plan for Europe funds under the European Fund for Strategic Investment have to also be met. So they are not exactly the same. So one has to bear in mind that both sets of criteria have to be met. The second thing is that as well as meeting the criteria, cities would have to set up their urban development fund in a way that the records that they keep for monitoring purposes are actually separated in terms of the two instruments. Thirdly, it's important to know that the state aid approach is actually different. So the European structural and investment funds count as state aid, but an EIB loan with a guarantee under the European Fund for Strategic Investment is not counted as state aid. So it's counted just as private financing would be counted. Now, perhaps one of the most important aspects is, in fact, that the European Fund for Strategic Investments, the financing under this cannot be used and counted as national co-financing for the structural funds. So that means that when there is a facility involving both, there has to be a structural funds grant and the national contribution, which are, let's say, one source of funding, and then the EIB guaranteed loan, which is carrying the guarantee under the European Fund for Strategic Investments, has to be an additional second source of funds under the facility. And then there may be other sources of funding from private sector investors in the fund and so forth. So this means that, in fact, whilst it's possible to do this kind of combination at the project level, it actually is perhaps a little easier to do it at the level of a financial instrument, and it can also be done at the level of an investment platform.